Kirk Hammett isn't the type of rock star that hides his emotions. And as someone who's been offended many times,
he basically just came up to me and apologized for all the bad-mouthing that he did to me, and
he has had plenty of enemies and plenty of people to hate. So now that Kirk Hammett is 62 years old, here are 7 artists he has finally named as the ones he hated the most. Starting our list, surprisingly, is someone who should be revered by Kirk Hammett instead of hated, and that's Joe Satriani. He was not just a guitar hero, he was a guitar architect. He grew up obsessed with tone and technique, and then turned that obsession into a syllabus. Before he became a global instrumental star, he taught. He taught Steve Vai, Alex Skolnick, Larry Lalonde, and a long list of other players who went on to define hard rock, thrash, and progressive sounds. But there was one student who stood out among the lot. His name was Kirk Hammett. Kirk Hammett arrived on that map as a hungry teenager from San Francisco. He cut his teeth in the Bay Area metal scene and then took a step that changed everything. He walked into Joe Satriani's lessons, and he sat beneath a teacher who insisted on discipline, fundamentals, and the slow, patient building of speed. Satriani remembered that young Kirk and he would keep working until the muscle memory arrived. Satriani had set up shop as a teacher in Berkeley and was taking on talented students. Hammett, already active in Exodus and then invited to join Metallica, sought lessons to level up. Satriani took him on as a student for roughly a year or two. He drilled Hammett on scales, alternate picking, phrasing, and the tiny articulations that separate good solos from great ones. Satriani later said that the last private lesson he gave to Hammett came in early 1988, a quiet punctuation to a relationship that had already done its work. Hammett's solos became tighter, his phrasing more daring, and his confidence on stage vaulted. Metallica's catalog moved from raw thrash to a broader sonic reach, and Hammett's playing grew into a defining voice of modern metal. He spoke of Satriani with gratitude and respect. But there was a time where Kirk Hammett didn't always harbor love for Satriani. What makes it even crazier is that it was while Satriani was crafting Hammett into a star that he felt the way he did about him. Satriani made him play the same 20-note sequences until calluses read like scripture. At night, Hammett wanted to bend a phrase into a scream and throw it into a crowd. Satriani made him play it again, slower, cleaner, purer. That tension felt like punishment. Hammett had natural flair, and he hated being forced into repetition. But if he had such emotions for his superiors, then he most definitely had heat for the younger generations. Artist number 6 is Tim Henson, a guitarist and a founding member of the instrumental progressive band Polyphia. Under his lead, the band has carved a distinctive lane, blending virtuosic technique, genre-bending arrangements, and a strong digital presence. Instead of the typical shredding and boomer bends of classic metal, Henson utilizes tapping, hybrid picking, and percussive elements to create complex, almost impossibly precise compositions. Band gained traction via viral YouTube videos, and Henson's skill earned him recognition as one of the most influential guitarists of his generation, with massive achievements like a collaboration with guitar legend Steve Vai, and even working with Hans Zimmer on the soundtrack of F1. So, how did Kirk Hammett manage to have a problem with such a guy? Well, the term boomer bands was a term that the rock world had not heard before, and a term describing veterans coming from a new age rock star could always get misinterpreted, and apparently it did. In an interview with Rolling Stones, Kirk Hammett said this: "Boomer bends. I love that. But you know, is he gonna call Eddie Van Halen a boomer guitar player there? I really like Henson's style. It's really unique, and in terms of technique, it's amazing. But then, it's the age-old question. How relatable is it? It's good to listen to 3 or 4 times." The heart of Hammett's issue was the emotional accessibility of the music, contrasting complexity with raw feeling. Can you really relate? Sometimes people just want to listen to music and not feel challenged. Sometimes people just want to feel raw emotion. Is he hitting on raw emotion? No, it's so complicated. It's a very distinct emotion that he's shooting for, and therefore, how accessible is it on a larger scale? He doubled down, suggesting that ultimately, most listeners prefer something comforting over something challenging. It's amazing playing, but at the end of the day, people want something that's comforting and satisfying, and is not that hard. I love watching him play, but man, after a while, I'm probably gonna go and put on a Jeff Beck album or Stevie Ray Vaughan, or maybe put on the Misfits or something. Given how polarizing these comments were, Tim definitely did have a reply. When Henson saw the Metallica legend's remarks via a Google alert, His reaction was a mix of pride and pain. I click on it and I started reading and I'm just like, oh my God, this is a compliment and a diss at the same time from Kirk Hammett. The comments hit home hard for the Polyphia camp. Henson noted that his bandmate and fellow guitarist, Scott LePage, a self-professed Metallica head, was visibly upset. Scott got sad, Henson admitted. However, Henson chose to focus on the positive, seeing the mere acknowledgement as a victory for the new generation. But I was happy because in an interview that Kirk Hammett was doing about Hammett activities and the world of Kirk Hammett, my name was brought up. So I'm happy about that, and I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate that he even has thoughts about it. Henson didn't let just a moment pass without a final, hopeful gesture to bridge the generational divide, a public plea to the thrash titan. Kirk, if you are reading this one, thank you for the acknowledgement. You're a legend. Take us on tour, dude. Please, seriously, man. Let's talk about it over beer, maybe. Artist number 5 is Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish virtuoso whose neoclassical guitar work rewrote the rulebook of what a shredder could be. But somewhere between the riffs and the riffs of note bending, a conflict began. And it wasn't just about speed, it was about why you play the guitar. Yngwie Malmsteen didn't tiptoe into guitar greatness. He exploded. He locked himself away as a teenager in his childhood bedroom, determined to master the instrument like a classical violinist. In 1984, his debut solo album, Rising Force, dropped and changed everything. It featured lightning-fast arpeggios, classical flourishes, fretboards that seemed to stretch across realms, and music that said, "This guitar is a weapon and an instrument of art." Over decades, he released over 30 solo albums, fused rock with Baroque and Romantic techniques, and earned his place in the Swedish Music Hall of Fame. To him, guitar was precision, arpeggio mastery, perfect pitch, and technique that crawled into your brain and discomforted it, in a good way. Kirk Hammett, by contrast, came into a different scene. With Metallica, he built riffs that were huge, songs that chanted themselves, solos that served the song rather than mere fireworks. Hammett himself said he cared about clarity, power, emotion, not simply playing fast to show off. In a 1994 interview, Malmsteen was asked to listen blind to songs and comment on guitarists. When he heard a live version of Metallica's Master of Puppets, he praised the band for their overall force and songwriting. But then, the lead guitar player, Kirk Hammett, is not very good. He can play fast, but his choice of notes and sense of pitch are horrible. I don't think that he plays with musicality or plays in tune. Rather than lifting the song, his solo seems to be an anticlimax. Stinging words from a giant, directed at someone still performing at the top of the field. Hammett's response was never headline screaming, but his stance was clear. He valued what Malmsteen criticized. Hammett said he cared about the song and that busy playing or endless technical show-off was not what he was after. Malmsteen believed guitarists should strive for perfection, lightning speed, flawless technique, and a sense of classical discipline transplanted into metal. He saw hunger in fast runners, but disdain in solos that felt sloppy or unmelodic from his viewpoint. Hammett believed the guitar was a tool in service of songwriting, catharsis, and audience connection. Because this fight wasn't staged, it wasn't a PR stunt, it was real. It carried the weight of evolving metal. It reflected how guitar playing changed in the 80s and 90s. Artist number 4 is Gary Holt. Kirk Hammett didn't arrive in Metallica from nowhere. He was one of the founding sparks of the Bay Area thrash furnace called Exodus. In the band's earliest incarnation, he traded licks and demos with the scene's young clutch of players, cut a handful of raw demos with Exodus in 1982, and then got the call that changed everything, an invitation to audition for Metallica. He left Exodus in 1983, and the rest is heavy metal history, solos, stadiums, and records that reshaped the genre. But the way history reads on paper isn't the same as how it feels in the rehearsal room. Years later, fans and journalists noticed something. Riffs that had been part of Exodus demo tapes or live set lists seemed to surface inside early Metallica songs. Kirk himself has admitted that some guitar ideas he'd carried from his Exodus days made their way into Metallica material. Riffs with the same DNA as Exodus tracks such as Impaler and Die by His Hand show up in songs like Trapped Under Ice, and elements that recall Creeping Death. That admission has a sting to it when you imagine the tape-swapping, tight-knit community those young players were a part of. Gary Holt had come up inside that same scene, took over Exodus's guitar and songwriter mantle, and spent decades defending the band's legacy. He didn't take the similarity lightly. In interviews, Holt has said there were riffs he wrote while Kirk was still with Exodus, and that Kirk later tried to adapt them. "I changed it a little bit. I'm a co-writer on this riff," Holt recalled, describing at least 2 riffs that became a point of contention. The tone in Holt's retelling is sharp. It's not just a technical credit dispute, it's about ownership of the cultural fingerprints that define a band. To hear it from Kirk's side is to hear something closer to guilt and context than malice. He said he felt conflicted about leaving Exodus and later acknowledged that some early Metallica riffs traced back to that demo-era pool of ideas, a murky stew where friends, tape traders, and managers all shared material around the same time. Kirk has explained the borrowing as part of that messy context and as something he later felt uneasy about. Those 2 lines, "I used it" and "I felt guilty," are what turned a technical borrowing into a narrative about friendship and perceived betrayal. But that's not the only person Hammett felt stabbed in the back by. Number 3 is Lars Ulrich. The tension between Hammett and Ulrich didn't explode overnight. It sat quietly in the mid-90s-80s. Hammett confirmed one of the biggest rumors. Around 1985 to 86, the band seriously considered firing Lars Ulrich. An interview with Metal Insider Kirk Hammett revealed this. "That was just an old thing. You know, I think at one point or another, we were pissed off at Lars, around maybe 1985 or something. We were happy, and we might have grumbled something to someone." Got its most vivid glimpse of internal strife in the 2004 documentary Some Kind of Monster. Speaking of St. Anger, between 2001 and 2003, the band hired therapist Phil Towell to help them work through conflicts. The camera caught raw argument after raw argument, one major bone of contention, guitar solos. And producer Bob Rock wanted no solos at all on the album. Hammett exploded. He argued removing solos was just following a trend and feared the album would sound dated, lifeless. Besides this, there was something else that made him harbor hatred for Lars. The fact that no matter how badly he felt he was treated, there would be nobody to hear him out, because Metallica felt less like a band and more like a hierarchy from the inside. Hammett felt he was bottom of the ladder. He had won riches, fame, a place in a legendary band, but he also accepted that his role was fixed, constrained. He confessed that he had to live with compromises, but worst of all, he felt stuck in their shadows. In 2020 interview, "I say I'm leaving Metallica, and then what? Everyone would look at me and say, 'Hey, that's the Metallica guy.' Let go anyway." That's why he hated every moment of it. Because triumphant concerts, the gold records, the screaming crowds, they masked the emptiness of not being fully heard. The solo parts he poured his passion into sometimes became templates. The citing decisions sometimes excluded him. Box of fame swallowed the man behind the guitar. At number 2, we have Paul Baloff. In the foggy pre-thrash dawn of the San Francisco Bay Area, a young guitarist named Kirk Hammett was just starting to carve his niche. At high school, he and a few friends founded a band that would become Exodus. Hammett, attending De Anza High School in Richmond, California, and hanging in the local scene, formed the seed of Exodus while still in his teens. From backyard rehearsals to punching through the walls at club gigs, Exodus began to gain traction with their early demos, raw sound, and punk. Hammett brought in Paul Baloff as vocalist. Bonded by their shared appetite for heavy riffs and aggressive energy, they recorded early demos, laid down foundational riffs, and built their identity: heavy, nasty, unflinching. Exodus's early output would go on to influence countless thrash bands. But for Hammett, something else was stirring, a bigger calling. In an interview, he said, "I'd seen a flyer. Paul saw them at their first show ever in the Bay Area, and I thought, these guys are great, but they'd be so much better with me." It was April 1st, 1983. Kirk Hammett was on the toilet. It was April 1st, April Fool's Day, and I was sitting on the toilet. The phone rang. It was the call from Metallica. I got the call from Mark Whitaker. I hung up and I was like, I can't believe I just got that phone call. Was that an April Fool's Day prank? Within days, Hammett knew he would leave Exodus to join Metallica, replacing Dave Mustaine and stepping onto a far bigger stage. The news hit the remaining members of Exodus, especially his friend Paul Baloff, like a brutal punch. The camaraderie of years turned instantly to rage and betrayal. Hammett, now facing his incandescent former bandmates, was met with a visceral display of anger from the iconic vocalist. In one of the most legendary, high-tension breakups in thrash history, Baloff unleashed his fury. "I told the guys in Exodus and they were pissed. They were pissed. I remember Paul Baloff was so pissed that he poured a beer over my head. He said, 'I can't believe you're doing this, Kirk.' Then poured his beer over my head. I just took it. Yeah, I know." Hammett left, taking some of his essential riffs with him, riffs that would end up on Metallica's first 2 albums, including the bridge for Creeping Death. Exodus would go on to record Bonded by Blood, becoming legends in their own right. But the chasm left by Hammett's departure was profound. This wasn't just a departure. It felt like betrayal to some, to Bailoff especially. The anger was real, visceral. Hammett admitted he carried guilt. "Oh yeah, I always had guilty feelings about that." Yet he also acknowledged he had left a lot of music with those guys' riffs he'd started with Exodus, ended up on Metallica's work. Years passed. Metallica ascended to global superstardom, but the shadow of Bailoff's anger remained part of the Exodus story. Then tragedy struck. On February 2nd, 2002, Paul Bailoff, the king of the B-side, suffered a catastrophic stroke and passed away at the age of 41. The metal world mourned the loss of one of its most unhinged and beloved frontmen. Hammett's reaction, despite the painful history, was one of profound grief for a lost brother. "Paul was my brother, my spirit, my soul, and he is gone. I wonder how I will ever recover, ever learn what it is to feel alive without him. And for this question, I have no answers." Despite the years of distance, the shared history was too deep to ignore. Hammett began to join his old bandmates for special events honoring Bailoff's memory, solidifying his place in the Exodus family once more. At the Bonded by Bailoff, a Decade of Remembrance anniversary show in 2012, Hammett stood on stage, paying tribute to the man who once doused him in beer. He did rule. He was a smart guy. He was always aware of what he was doing, even though he acted like he didn't. He played the most aggressive sets, Paul, rest in peace, man. But there's still someone Kirk Hammett hated more. At number 1, we have someone who was present for so much of Hammett's career, he couldn't escape it, and that's Dave Mustaine. His relationship with Kirk Hammett was a very weird case, because Mustaine might have been the one who hated Hammett first. When Kirk Hammett was tapped to join Metallica in 1983, it was one of the most brutal speedruns in rock history. He had one day to say goodbye to his band, Exodus, fly across the country, and take the place of the man Metallica had just kicked out, the volatile, brilliant, and deeply troubled Dave Mustaine. The morning that changed everything happened on April 11th, 1983. Metallica had decided that Mustaine's behavior and addiction problems had become impossible to manage. They woke him up, told him he was out, and then quietly hired Kirk Hammett from Exodus to take over the lead guitar spot. It was abrupt. For Mustaine, it felt like betrayal. For Metallica, it felt like survival. For Kirk, it was an opportunity wrapped in awkwardness. Mustaine never hid his resentment. He accused Metallica of taking his riffs and later claimed that some of the band's best parts had their origins in his playing and writing. He felt wronged, and he said as much in interview after interview. Mustaine told the world that he had been kicked out with no warning and no second chance. That anger brewed into Megadeth, a band built on virtuosity, speed, and an explicit refusal to be ignored. For years, Kirk Hammett tried to stay out of the storm. He respected Dave Mustaine's talent, everyone did, but he wanted no part of the chaos that seemed to follow him. To Kirk, Dave's playing was pure fire, fast, angry, unpredictable. But his ego, that was an inferno no band could control. Kirk's own philosophy was different. He cared about feel, about emotion over flash. And that difference became the invisible wall that divided them. Then came the explosion. In 1988, Mustaine let it all out. In a fiery interview, he accused Metallica of ripping him off, and he didn't stop there. He called Kirk Hammett a mediocre guitarist who only copied his solos. For Dave, it wasn't just bitterness, it was revenge through words. He wanted the world to know that Metallica's success had been built on his blueprints. Kirk didn't stay quiet for long. In a 1991 Guitar World interview, he finally broke his silence. Calm but cold, he said, "Dave's got his thing, we've got ours. I don't hate the guy, but his attitude sucks." It was short, sharp, and it cut deep. But underneath all the public jabs, there was real pain. In 2004, the documentary Some Kind of Monster showed Mustaine like the world had never seen him before. Vulnerable, tearful, still haunted by being kicked out of Metallica. Sitting across from Lars Ulrich, he admitted that the rejection still tormented him decades later. Kirk wasn't there for that conversation, but 10 years later, he opened up about it in an interview. He said, "Dave was volatile and it was affecting the band. I stepped in and I made it work." It was a quiet acknowledgement that Mustaine's downfall had become his opportunity. The feud didn't die right away. For years, the two men traded subtle digs in magazines and interviews. But then, something changed. In the 2010s, the big four of thrash, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax, finally stood on the same stage. And during one electric night in 2011, they all performed Am I Evil together. The crowd went silent for a moment, watching the unthinkable. Hammett and Mustaine laughing, even hugging, on stage. For the first time in decades, the tension broke. The hatred gave way to history. Later, Hammett reflected on it, saying, "I've always understood Dave's feelings about being kicked out of Metallica, and I've always shown empathy for him. He was just pissed off." There you have it, the 7 artists that Kirk Hammett hated the most. Are there any artists here you think didn't deserve Kirk's mean side? Let us know what you think in the comments, or you hit the subscribe button for more videos like this.